Well, it is a pleasure to be here this afternoon to get to share with all of you a little insight into some of what we've been working on at the Blanco Center over at UL Lafayette. I'll start with a couple of comments. Notes from my bio and background. Put a lot of work, including 10 years at LSU, into pursuing grant-funded research. And as I have to repeatedly remind my wife, I don't get to keep all that money. So $17 million has helped us get a lot of work done. And as we think about the work of the Blanco Center, we're always looking to try to figure out how we can leverage resources to help do more work for the benefit of the state of Louisiana. One other thing I'll just mention briefly, and this was touched on, but I'm originally from Baton Rouge and still live in Baton Rouge. And so I think my family was deeply rooted here when I had the opportunity to take on this new professional challenge at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And I think one of the foundational premises of the Blanco Center was to be a statewide resource for Louisiana. And with a goal of influencing policy, with a lot of policy happening here in Baton Rouge, it has turned out to be, I think, kind of a nice combination to be able to represent the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, but get to spend a lot of hours in Baton Rouge and also at the Capitol helping to try to push change forward. So with that being said, I've got a lot that I'd like to talk about. I've got 2.5 hours for this. Three? Oh, good. I can get 3 hours. What I'm going to do is, again, I think the Blanco Center has been around since 2019. So we're about 4.5 years down the road. We're a relatively young research center, as university-based centers are. They don't pop up every day. And so I think we've covered a lot of ground over the last 4.5 years, but we're still in the middle of growing the center and kind of fully forming what I think we can be as a resource for Louisiana. We were founded as kind of in some sense, to help carry forward the legacy of our former governor, Kathleen Blanco, with a focus squarely placed on the state of Louisiana. And so our core purpose is to advance evidence-based public policy to make Louisiana a better place to live and work. And we really embrace that mission of focusing on Louisiana. Now, to do this as a university-based research center, we always tell ourselves, and I remind my staff regularly, that if we're doing this well, we're going to be conducting that research at a level of quality that is contributing to the broader body of knowledge around how we deal with challenges that have been generational challenges for Louisiana, but are not unique to Louisiana. So as we look at the policy priority areas that we focus on, education, poverty and economic opportunity, criminal justice reform, coast and environment, healthcare, and governmental ethics, these are all things that Governor Blanco championed during her many years of public service, but they're also the things that have really stuck around for generations as persistent challenges in Louisiana. And so as a group of social science researchers, we're an interdisciplinary research center. We talk about Louisiana as sort of a laboratory where we have an opportunity to study and learn, and then we want to bring those insights back to the policymakers to really influence change. So we're really about doing applied research that helps to make real-world changes. Over the last several years, we've had a lot of success specifically at the Blanco Center. We've put together a large enough cluster of research around a few of those key priority areas that we've really launched dedicated research programs to help organize and put some emphasis on those things. And at this point, those things focus on economic and environmental resilience, and that really has helped us to pull together a wide range of work that we've done looking at coastal issues and flood risk in different parts of the state, as well as long-term economic vitality for the state and how we can build a more resilient Louisiana economy, as well as child development opportunities. And that research program really pulls together a lot of work we've done related to early childhood development and education, as well as a pretty large area of work supporting the State Department of Child and Family Services in trying to help chart a new path for child welfare, as well as bringing more data and analytics into the decision-making process at that agency. Over just the last several years, I think we've been off to a quick start. We've at the Blanco Center, I'm an economist, so I talk in numbers sometimes. So 30 grants with close to $9 million in external funding at this point. So I think we've been growing rapidly with a full-time staff currently at 17, but we are right in the middle of a really rapid growth period, and I'll talk a little bit later about what's driving that. But as we continue to grow as a research center and a resource for Louisiana, we expect by this summer to be up to a full-time staff of around 30. So in addition to that, we work to get our graduate students engaged. We work actively to collaborate with researchers throughout the state. Over the past year, we've had joint grant applications and joint research projects with folks at LSU and UNO, even some of the community colleges, LSU Shreveport, and really all corners of the state. And so, unfortunately, I don't have the many hours that it would take to really try to give you all a rundown of all the things we're up to. So I'm just going to give you a little sampling. If I'd have gotten in here earlier, I would have said these are your appetizers, but I'll highlight one exciting project that was just released earlier this week, and that was an economic impact study that we did for First Solar, which is America's largest domestic solar manufacturing company, and they're based in Ohio. What's really kind of fun and interesting about this project is they currently have no operations in Louisiana. Now, many of you may have heard they're planning to build a $1 billion solar manufacturing facility in New Iberia, Louisiana, which is really the heart of Louisiana's sort of traditional oil and gas country, and I think serves as a great marker in time as we think about the energy transition and how Louisiana's economy is changing. But it's been an exciting project because we had a chance to meet them and get to know them as they began to explore Louisiana as a potential site, and came ultimately to the Blanco Center to help them put together this research product, which they've been using to engage with the White House and congressional leadership to help make the case for how domestic manufacturing and really working to cultivate the domestic supply chain, most notably, really can be a game changer for the economy. So their home base is Ohio. They've got a development currently underway in Alabama. They will be building a new site here in Louisiana. But an exciting opportunity for us to be engaged in research that has helped to shape the thinking around recruiting a company here to Louisiana, but also something that's been used at the national level to help inform and shape what the federal incentive structure should look like for alternative energy. And so not to get too far into the details, but early versions of the big federal infrastructure bill included incentives for domestic manufacturing. And it turned out a lot of solar manufacturers couldn't do it because they were really just importing parts from China, assembling them with a little bit of work, and selling them as an American product. And what distinguished First Solar is decades of work to build up a domestic supply chain. So it's been a really exciting project to work on, getting some national attention now, and a great example of how we want to work, not only work on the things that matter here, but do those things in a way that has as broad an impact as possible. Another project I'll tell you briefly about is focused on childcare in the state economy. And we've been supporting the Department of Education for a few years now with budget planning and policy simulations. So helping them better manage the Child Care Assistance Program. And over the course of those years, we've been able to help them project what different policy changes might do to the monthly costs related to this program, and ultimately make decisions about what can the program handle in terms of trying to increase the reimbursement rates that are paid to child care centers so that centers can provide higher quality care, as well as making eligibility expanded to a larger set of Louisiana families. Along the way, as we came through the pandemic, the CCAP program was given some additional one-time funds out of some of the federal support programs that were put in place. And we helped the State Department of Education envision a statewide grant program that we structured as a randomized controlled trial. And so we had a $20 million pot of funds that we used over the course of 2 years to give 400 child care centers grants to pay their teachers extra pay. Now, we didn't have enough funds to give those to every single child care center, so we have a group of centers that didn't receive those funds, and we have 2 groups of centers that got funds, one that got a fixed stipend for each teacher and another that had a stipend that was proportional to pay. We're about 2/3 of the way through that grant program, and at the end, not only will that have given some child care centers extra pay to help keep teachers in the classroom, but we'll be able to walk away with data that can help inform research that lets us really understand better how to solve the problem of teacher shortages and access to childcare in different parts of the state. So taking opportunities to help bring more research into the decision-making process, bring more research into the planning process, so that over time we can have a program like the state's Child Care Assistance Program helping to deliver services more efficiently and with broader access across the state. I'm going to spend the remainder of my time really talking about one big new initiative, which is called LA First. Before I do that, I'll just kind of recap off. Those are two examples of some projects that we've been working on with upwards of 30 projects that we've either started or are ongoing at the Blanco Center. We're doing a lot of program evaluation, a lot of data analytics work. We've kind of got a dedicated team that we've now built up around data analytics to support state agencies and other policy stakeholders and bringing more data into those decision-making processes. But on that theme of data, the really exciting development that I want to share with you all today, something that we haven't talked a lot about publicly because we've kind of had our heads down building, is LA First, and that stands for Louisiana's Foundational Integrated Research System for Transformation, and this is something that was created by the legislature in the regular session of 2023. This data system is going to allow us to bring together data from multiple state agencies to be able to do longitudinal research that we then bring back to the legislature to inform policy. So from a researcher's standpoint, this is sort of a dream scenario. We've got the legislature saying, we want more data, we want more research to help make sure that we're doing things the right way, that we're getting a maximum return on investment out of the state dollar. And we've now got an opportunity for the first time ever, really, in the state of Louisiana, to take something like this on seriously. So the vision for LA First is really big picture, pie in the sky kind of stuff, but we are building it out and we're going to make it happen. So to implement long-term, lasting change, data is a key resource that we must leverage in order to maximize our return on public investments. And so we are building a multi-agency longitudinal data system. Longitudinal data, that means we're able to track things over a long period of time. So be able to see the same individuals that move through the K-12 system into higher ed and then out into the workforce. And as we're able to do that at a system level, to be able to understand what's working and what's not working with publicly funded programs. So this is an opportunity, this is not a new data collection exercise, but this is an opportunity for us to leverage data the state already has, and in some sense you could think of this as sort of the big data that Louisiana has that's been sitting in silos historically. We're now able to start bringing that together in order to learn a lot more than we've ever been able to learn before. Finally, the goal here is specifically in-depth analysis to guide enhancement of existing public programs and policies and inform development of new programs and policies. So again, this is something that was initiated by the legislature, and they are really the primary audience here. Just to give you all a little bit of background, this is something, to some of you this may sound like a very logical idea, to some of you this may sound very foreign and maybe even a little unexpected, but this is something that is really following a private sector trend that we've seen running for decades now. With the advent of bigger data systems where we can collect more information, obviously there's concerns that come up around that, and I'm going to talk about that. But there have been incredible insights that the private sector has been able to draw out of those things, and in fact we've seen a lot of states go down this path as well. So the U.S. Department of Education began a federal grant program to give states resources to build systems like this back in 2002. And in fact, Louisiana has received a few of those grants specifically looking at K-12 data and building better data systems that can link up the complex data that are collected in the K-12 system. At this point, 51 states and territories have a system like this in operation, at least with that K-12 education data, which was really the first place that, because of the complexity of those data and the volume of data, that was the first place where I think there was a lot of attention built to kind of modernizing and trying to leverage more insights out of those things. And then several years later, the U.S. Department of Labor introduced kind of a sister grant program in 2010 to focus on workforce longitudinal data systems, so workforce data. And in fact, Louisiana was one of 10 states that got funding in round one. We were one of the first states to actually build a system like this. And I had the opportunity when I was at LSU. We had a close working relationship with the Louisiana Workforce Commission, and they asked us to help them write that grant. So we put that together for them, and then when they got the funding, they brought us in to be kind of the research partner to help drive that initiative forward. And over 3 years, we built this incredible longitudinal data system, and we were the first state in the country to successfully complete and launch a workforce longitudinal data system. 3 months later, the legislature passed a new data privacy law that essentially prohibited the State Department of Education from collecting certain PI, personal information, on students. And on that day, the Workforce Commission deleted all of the K-12 data out of the data system and essentially pushed the rest of the data system to a back burner. There was, given the, and the legislative action wasn't something that was really motivated by this research-driven effort. It was something that came up out of more general public concerns around Common Core and a lot of parental engagement around education policy, and this kind of just got swept up in it. And so for 10 years, Louisiana has been stuck kind of at the back of the line with less access to data than any other state. And so it took an act of the legislature to be able to move forward what it is that we're now doing. So in the regular session in 2023, Senator Cortez, Senate President in that session, authored a bill, which was Senate Bill 205, that eventually became Act 394, that made it through kind of really ultimately sailed through the legislature. As we moved this bill through the legislature, we heard time and time again in committees from members of the legislature how excited they were that we were finally going to be able to answer the questions that they've been asking, which turns out some of the prior legislative actions were the reasons why we couldn't answer them. But we now have an opportunity to sort of take this on seriously, and we will be bringing together data from the Louisiana Workforce Commission, the Department of Child Family Services, the Department of Public Safety and Corrections, Office of Juvenile Justice, Department of Health, Department of Education, as well as the Board of Regents. So the legislature established this as an initiative of the Board of Regents to be administered by the Kathleen Blanco Public Policy Center at UL Lafayette. So we are actively working on building this out, and I brought with me Rachel Varon and Julian Hartwell, two members of my team who are really key people in this initiative. Rachel is our LA First Director. I know several of you know Rachel. And Julian is our Chief Data Scientist for LA First. And so they've both been working furiously to get this moving as quickly as we can, because we also know that policy impacts people in real time. And so, we're working to try to move this work forward so that we can start generating results. But this is a big initial lift to put something in place that can be a resource for generations to come that we've never really had an opportunity to do previously in Louisiana. Another theme throughout this bill was, in some sense, to treat this as a small opening. So I mentioned earlier about kind of that background of concerns around privacy and protection of data. And I think a lot of legislators who were excited about this still held those concerns and didn't want to just open up the can of worms around data security, data privacy, and open up access broadly. So this was created in a very limited way. And that's part of why we saw that with one designated entity to be doing this work. So this is not a data system that lots of groups will have access to. Only the employees of the Blanco Center who are dedicated to LA First will be working with the data, so it's a very narrow focus there. And in fact, the charge for our work is very specific. So this is not the Blanco Center's new research data set. This is data that's going to help us produce 3 reports annually. The first report is called Launch Louisiana, which really focuses on those transitions from the K-12 public education system into college and career. So, again, right now we can study the K-12 system, we have data on that. We can study the higher ed system, we have data on that, but we don't have that connectivity. And so this is going to give us an opportunity to really make those linkages and better understand the transition from K-12 into college or career. And really be able to present new insights about what's working and what's not. When we look at a program like Jumpstart, that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, is that accomplishing everything that we hope it is? Is there something we can learn from this about ways we can reform or revise how that is so that it hits on all cylinders? Perhaps finding best case examples out of some parts of the state that seem to be working really well that we can replicate. The second major report is focused on employment outcomes, and there's going to be some overlap between those first 2 themes, but this second report is really looking at that linkage between higher education and the workforce, and understanding, again, What do those transition pathways look like? How do how do people who earn a degree in Louisiana fare in the job market, as well as getting a better understanding of some of those anecdotal stories that we hear, like the value of a liberal arts education. We don't have the same obvious pathway from, say, an accounting major to a job as an accountant, or a chemical engineering major to a job as a chemical engineer, but we know a lot of people who go through and excel in liberal arts programs go on to have great career success. And this is going to be an opportunity for us to better understand what those linkages look like, as well as perhaps identify areas where people aren't having the same success, and share that information publicly so that people understand the costs and benefits and the trade-offs in a lot of those important life decisions. Finally, and as we work through a special session today on criminal justice issues, I wish this bill had been passed 5 years ago. We'd have a lot more to say. But there, like we talk about, planting an oak tree. If you didn't plant it, 20 years ago or 100 years ago, the best time to plant it is today. So the third major area of focus is causes and consequences of criminal and delinquent acts, which is focused specifically on criminal justice issues, both on the sort of front end, what are predictive factors that we might identify that can help us better understand ways to reduce involvement in criminal activity, as well as on the back end, when people are released back into society, what are the things that are working or not working to help get people re-engaged and into a stable career and or opportunities for them to grow and really thrive. So those are the three specific reports that we are charged with. There's a lot of work to be done to produce those three. There are a million other questions that we've been thinking about that we know we'd want to be able to look into, but that's it. We're doing these three reports. That's what the law says, and that's what the legislature has charged us with, and it's a great start. The last thing I want to mention a little bit more about confidentiality and data security. I've talked about this briefly. I mentioned it earlier, but I think we will never talk about LA First without talking about this, because this is a central and kind of foundational concern. So the first thing that I'll mention briefly is one of the technological solutions that we arrived at to ensure that we're doing this in a smart way, in a safe way, was to actually build and house the system within the State Office of Technology Services. So, by and large, every one of these data systems currently resides inside the State Office of Technology Services. But again, because of the historical legal restrictions, they could not be connected, or in some cases there wasn't attention and focus and energy being put into connecting those data sources. So this will now give us an opportunity for the staff of the Blanco Center to bring those data together within the same secure environment that those data are being stored in today. So no changes in risk in terms of protection of data. And we're going to have a multi-layered process for reviewing results to make sure that anything that comes out of this data system has been thoroughly vetted. So that it's going to include a very robust internal review that we'll go through to make sure that we're comfortable that we've aggregated up the data sufficiently, that there's no personal information that could be disclosed, and then that'll be shared back with each individual agency whose data was contributed to the system before anything goes out for public release. But in the end, as I said, our primary audience may be bringing this to the legislature, but we also want to make sure that we're sharing that with the public at large. So that is, those are kind of the broad brushstrokes of the data system. Specific data to be shared, this is sort of a process that we are working through right now in real time. In fact, I guess just yesterday we had the State Office of Technology Services sort of officially and create that sort of technical space where we will begin to pull data together. But the type of data that we're bringing in here from the K-12 system includes information on enrollment, assessment information and discipline information, post-secondary data on enrollment and completers from different programs, quarterly wage records from the Louisiana Workforce Commission, which include occupational information, Medicaid and WIC enrollment data, SNAP and FITAP enrollment data from the Department of Child and Family Services, as well as Department of Corrections, Adult Corrections, as well as Office of Juvenile Justice involvement. So this is work that's ongoing currently, as well as active work to recruit additional researchers to build out the team and make sure we've got the resources to be able to deliver very high quality work in a timely basis. But I'm going to leave it there with a few minutes left for questions. first question here.
I don't know if y'all can hear me, okay? I worked at LSU for 37 years, so I'm really curious about the tracking part of this. So when a student goes to a private school or a parochial school and not through the public school system, or when they go through K through 12 and leave for college or career, how are you going to track them? What do you use?
So the question is about being able to identify and kind of track people who might be coming up through a private K-12 system or school, as well as attending colleges outside of the state or a private institution. And so the short answer to that is, when we talk about research like this in a general way, and we think about the people of Louisiana in general, it is important to acknowledge that there is a common thread here, which is public dollars, public programs. And so we don't have the complete picture. You know, we don't have information on everybody. This is a huge down payment in some sense. And over time, we will have opportunities to complete the picture in different ways. We might be able to bring in additional aggregated data to help us better understand those contextual pieces. And there are some cases, such as private colleges in Louisiana. There's a data sharing consortium there, not currently envisioned as part of LA First, but something that may be a future expansion. So that's going to be something that we're always thinking about and aware of in the research that we do, that there is going to be kind of a limit in terms of scope with a focus on the public sector.
So do you use social security number, and if they leave, let's say they leave the university system, go to a job and go on, are you planning to track them? I mean, I'm getting into privacy issues.
Yeah, so bringing up a question about privacy issues and exactly how are we going to link data. And I think the first thing that I will say is privacy is our first concern and the first thing that we have to address. In general terms, the data system is going to be split into two distinct areas of work with different staff working on those areas. The first is a more technical kind of front-end environment where we bring the original data, create the linkages, remove the personal information, and then bring that into a production environment where the research staff is working with the data in a way where we have lots of records, but we don't know the personal information attached to each record. So privacy is going to be something that's kind of hardwired into the way the system operates. Exactly how that's linked is something that we're actively working on. Learning best practices from other states as well as doing research of our own on making sure we've got the best method for that. It's going to work. And in general, the best methods include using multiple pieces of information about a person to create that unique identifier. So we don't really want the personal information, but it's a necessary step in order to create the linkages. So the goal would be bringing that information into the system, using a rigorous process to replace that personal information with a generated unique identifier, and then moving that set of the data over for the research team to actually work with. And that's a very short version of what is a very long conversation that we're having. I have a question over here.
In regard to the legislation that's being passed now in the criminal deterrent, do you have research that shows that the actual legislation that they're passing will actually deter crime?
So this is a question about what's happening currently in the legislative session. What can we say about what might be the effects of bills that are being considered and even passed in real time now? And I will say that's an important question. And that question kind of links back up to the broader, long-standing area of work at the Blanco Center. And over our last several years, we've put together quite a few in-depth research reports, as well as policy briefs, which are a quicker assessment of a policy issue. I think our biggest challenge is growing this new center and adding capacity so that we are fully equipped to be able to weigh in closer to real time and make sure that we can bring that sort of neutral voice from the research community into the decision-making process. Short answer is we are not highly engaged in this session, in part because we kind of have our heads down working through some of the longer term work. Okay, I think I had a question over here earlier.
I had a question about, and like you said, the past legislation and null and void, but do y'all, what is your outlook on the use of AI in data research, especially as a, for Louisiana policy?
So, very good question about how AI influences policy research. Any thoughts on how, outlook there? It is clear that artificial intelligence and other, machine learning type tools have advanced dramatically in their capabilities and their ability and their utility over the last several years. I think it's something that we actively think about. In fact, we're having conversations about writing up for ourselves kind of a policy on AI and how and when we might incorporate that into our own work. And there are, I think, use cases that add a lot of value and help the same set of researchers accomplish far more. But it's obviously, with anything new, something that has to be done carefully and only when appropriate. So I think we've kind of got our guard up, but we're thinking about it, and it's something we're working on. To be clear, with LA First, we're not entertaining that. I think this is kind of a tight lockdown control system where we want to make sure there's no questions around the data privacy concerns and security. So for the time being, there's not really a near-term plan, but it's something broadly at the Blanco Center that we are thinking about. I want to go over here. I think I had one more question. Okay, one more question. Here, okay, yes.
Your minimum temporal look back on one of your slides was 5 years. Are you prohibited from requesting and obtaining more than 5 years' worth? Because it strikes me that particularly with the current special session, it would be highly beneficial to look back more than 5 years, because there's a lot of debate around the changes that occurred in 2017, and people currently are excited to dismiss data that has come out of the changes in 2017, and if they don't like the data that have been produced, they just say, well, it's bad data. It would be, I think, beneficial to know from a more neutral perspective what the results were, but 5 years won't catch that very well if we're starting from next year.
So, question about the 5-year look back, and that was added to the bill just to serve as a starting point, and the phrasing is specifically a minimum of 5 years. So we are not prohibited, and in fact, most agencies have already committed to us to provide a longer history, or at least several have explicitly committed. I think our expectation is that we will be able to bring in a much longer history, but we needed to make sure we had a starting point. So the last thing related to that I will say about this, coming back to the earlier question about the current legislative session, and I think the big picture question about research to inform policy, we don't have the research ready today to say whether the bill being proposed or considered is on the right track or not. But if we build this system and we can sustain it, and sustaining it is going to require support from highly engaged people like you to remind your legislators that this is important for the long-term future of the state, even if we sometimes find out that somebody's idea wasn't a good one, right? So I think we will have an opportunity down the road to take a longer view look at prior set of reforms, maybe current set of reforms that are in the works here, and be able to learn a lot from that process. So that's absolutely the long-term vision for LA First. And I will leave it there.